Australia will soon build a fleet of nuclear-powered submarines in an historic security pact with the United States and the UK known as AUKUS. It's a serious issue, but there was a lighter moment yesterday when the pact was introduced by the US President Joe Biden, the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson and some other guy.
And I want to thank that fellow down under. Thank you very much, pal. Appreciate it, Mr. Prime Minister.
Oh, it's Joe Biden for you, isn't it? Joining us now is the former Defence Minister Wayne Mapp for his analysis on what this means, particularly what it means for us here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Morena, thank you so much for joining us.
Morena, Ryan.
Tell me what this submarine, this nuclear-powered submarine, what the Australians actually need with it, want with it.
Well, this has been a debate going on in Australia for probably a decade or more. And the reason they have always thought about it is that their main submarine base is in Perth, but their main patrol area is way up in the sort of northwest Pacific, around Southeast Asia. So that's like thousands and thousands of miles. Their current submarines spend so much time getting there, they spend not that much time on patrol before they have to go back again. That will all change with nuclear submarines. So it's obvious this whole deal is about China, no question about that. And that's obvious to anyone who thinks about it. Look, it's a big deal. Australia is showing, and they've always wanted to do this, that they're stepping up. They're a middle power, but they want to see themselves at the top rank of middle powers. And, this is the first, well, it's actually the second time the United States has ever done this in terms of nuclear technology. The last time they did it was actually with the British back in the 1960s. So yes, this is a big step up for Australia, and it does have implications for New Zealand. And I want to talk. That we have to change our nuclear-free policy, but it has other implications.
Yeah, and I want to talk about that. But just you mentioned that the United States is sharing for the second time only that kind of intel, that kind of information to build these things with Australia. Are they safe?
Yes, I mean, the Americans and the British, they've never had a nuclear accident with their submarines, and they've been in operation nearly 70 years. So that's an incredibly strong record. But we have our nuclear policy really for reasons other than safety. It's really about, it's an expression of New Zealand's independent foreign policy. But, we've been able to work with partners and allies anyway, and that relationship has been strengthened over the last 2 decades. I mean, I saw it when I was Minister of Defence as a key thing to strengthen the relationship with partners and allies.
Are we being a little bit silly with our principles, though? And I don't mean to, run roughshod over decades and decades of principles and morals here in New Zealand, but the reality is, if there was some kind of war with China in the South China Sea or whatever, and the Australians rang us up or the Americans rang us up and said, hey, we need to put some nuclear subs through your waters to protect you, we're not going to say no, are we?
Well, that's a complete hypothetical. The last place submarines need to be is around New Zealand, to be honest. Any conflict is not going to be here, that's for sure.
All right, so this idea that we've been left out in the cold on this one, you're saying actually it's not really something we would have been involved in anyway?
I'd agree with that. However, as I said, it does have implications. And, Australia is our only ally. It's our only formal ally. Obviously, we have partnerships with the UK and the US, but Australia is our ally. They will be expecting us to step up a bit more than we do. So, for instance, Britain, Canada and Australia have all entered into a sort of a joint deal to replace their frigates with a British-designed frigate. They're going to be built in Australia and Canada as well. New Zealand's not part of that. And our Anzac frigates are now nearly a quarter of a century old. And frankly, it's time that the government got on with starting the conversation with our partners and actually with New Zealanders about what we're going to replace the Anzac frigates with, and indeed how many. 2 is frankly not enough. And it's not an issue the government can duck. We can't just sort of say, oh no, we don't have to worry about that for the next 2 years. The current government is going to have to deal with that issue in the next 2 years.
Interesting. Very quickly before we go, we are running out of time, but you are a former Defence Minister. You were privy to information that we as regular civilians probably weren't. For people watching this morning who are hearing, oh gosh, that sounds a bit alarming about China, how likely is a war involving China in the coming 10 years, 20 years, in your view?
Pretty low. The two major powers in the Pacific, the United States and China, are both nuclear powers. And, the reality is the deterrent does make a difference between the two of them. Having said that, there is a real risk of incidents, aircraft being shot down, ships having conflicts and so forth. So incidents are as a real risk. Major war, I personally don't think is likely because there's such huge incentives for both the major nations, and all their partners will be saying exactly the same thing, that they've got to resolve their differences by dialogue. But there's no doubt about it, there is a great power competition in the region.
All right, thank you so much for your time this morning. We really appreciate your analysis. That's former Defence Minister Wayne Mapp.